All right. Aloha, everyone. Michelle Melendez with Blossom Inner Wellness and StandTogetherHawaii.com. I'm the author of Great Maui Land Grab, What Caused the Maui Fire and Is Your Home Next? This is in the third edition, you guys, with 21 LA fire oddities. I mean, that was an absolute also other attack on the American people. I have just a legend here in understanding what the heck is going on in America. I get to interview G. Edward Griffin, who is the author of A Creature from Jekyll Island. He's a filmmaker, he's a speaker, he's the founder of the Red Pill Expo, which I had the pleasure and privilege to be at the expo, a speaker at the expo last year twice. Mr. Griffin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. I envy you sitting there outside in that beautiful location where you are. Of course, we're in Southern California. It's supposed to be pretty good here, but not like there in Hawaii. So, thank you for inviting me.
So Southern California, how close were you to the fires?
Pretty close. They were all around us, but we were very lucky. We could see all the smoke, and we could sort of watch it on television. And we were never in immediate danger, but you never know because the winds were exceedingly high, and the fires. We were told the fires can travel, 5 or 10 miles an hour pretty easily, or less than that, if the wind is good enough. So, anyway, we were very lucky, and we came out of it very well.
What were your thoughts on that fire? What did you think was going on?
Well, naturally, being the suspicious devil that I am, I was looking for all kinds of evidence of this being an engineered fire, and it was easy to see it. It was everywhere. There were a lot of similarities to the one that you had there where you were, similar to the fires that were in Northern California and everywhere in the past. We saw all the earmarks of this being an engineered fire, directed energy weapons, and so forth. Now that sounds really crazy to a lot of people. They think, "What kind of a paranoid person am I?" This is not paranoia because when you see when you see cars burning and melting, and they're standing out on the street, and there's nothing to put them on fire, and nothing around them to burn, but the cars melted, but the trees that are closest to them, they're still standing, maybe baked a little bit by the heat, but they didn't burn. And you see that over and over and over again, and you see anything with the color blue was spared, and you know that certain frequencies relating to the blue color in the spectrum are used by the military and their directed energy weapons. You all add all these things together, and you get to be very suspicious that this was indeed an engineered fire, supposedly, as you have so aptly pointed out, to clear the people off the land and get the land at pennies on the dollar so they can build them into so-called smart cities and all that sort of thing. So in short, that's my suspicion, and I think it's a fact.
Yeah, I'm going to just share a screen and do just a few. I want to get into the Federal Reserve and more other things, but I do want to share the things you talked about just now, which
Mhm.
is the trees that didn't burn. Look at this was this was on a news station, and I was like, I cannot believe they're showing this picture of all the houses in white ash, but the trees and the leaves
Mhm.
still unbelievable. This was another one with the LA fire and then the Maui fire. This one
Mhm.
was paradise. Look at all of the forest is still there.
I
And then
know. It's crazy. So anybody that can look at that and say it's a forest fire, I don't know what they're thinking. Doesn't look like one to me.
that's why they call it a wildfire now. The other things that you shared that I want to just quickly show. This was the blue things that didn't burn. But check
Mhm.
this out. This is a Mazda. This one right here. This is a Mazda Miata, and a right across the engine block is burnt out. How does that happen in a regular fire? But right across the street was the exact same car, Mazda Miata, blue, completely intact with a blue trash can. So across the street, one completely burned, and then right across the street, one completely intact. So that is that. If that doesn't tell people what's going on, I don't know what does. But let's go into the history of this because it is my feeling and my belief and my research that this he's not a United States of America any longer. It is a United States corporation. And you wrote the book, Creature from Jekyll Island, which I have to say made me cry and woke me up so much because I was like, I couldn't believe the information you got around the Federal Reserve. It's a second look at the Federal Reserve. And this Federal Reserve, which was established in 1913, I don't know how you got this information of how these people met. Like tell us a little bit about the history of how did you write this book?
Well, that takes us back quite a few years before the era of internet. So when writers wanted to do anything in depth, they had to go to the library and spend. It seemed like I spent half of my youth in the library looking at microfilm. They used to have big machines that were sitting on a table, and you go in and you want to take a look at, let's say, the New York Times newspaper for a certain period of time. And all the large libraries had rolls of film, microfilm, for every page of every issue of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and all the major newspapers and the magazines. So you go in and check out these rolls of film, you put them in the machine, and then you turn the light on, the light projects the image on the tray, and you're looking at the base of this whole thing. It looks like you're reading the newspaper. And you turn a crank, and all of a sudden the pages start moving as you crank this film through. It's kind of a weird experience because I had the feeling I was looking at history, going whiz through this machine.
I remember those machines.
Yeah,
I'm so
yeah, that's what you had to do. And of course, in the case of the Federal Reserve, there was a lot of, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, there were a lot of books that had been written in the past about banking and about that period of history, and not only just in the United States, but in Europe and around the world. So I just spent a couple of years of my time, my life in the library, reading everything I could about the history of banking, and acquired a couple of banker boxes full of notes and images, and then the time came to write, and away I went. It took a long time. I think I spent about, if you put all the time together, be about 7 years of time to get from ground zero where I started, where I knew literally nothing about banking and money. Um, I was and still am, you might say, the last person in the world who would be qualified to write about such a topic. I knew nothing about it. I never studied it in school. I had no degrees on it. I had no interest in it, frankly, prior to then. But that's how I did it, and it was a slow process, and it was in fact, I'm still learning about it as I go. I want to emphasize that it did not suddenly all pop into view at once, because it's a many-faceted story, and many layered as well. You have to not only look in many different places, but you have to look deep into the topic to get into the hidden parts of the story as well. So that's how I did it. There was no easy task, but anybody could have done it if they just spent the time.
so now what well actually the start of this was way even before the banking the bankers took over this country. What when do you feel that the bankers took over this country? My feeling was it was in the Civil War, because I know that the bankers always fund both sides of the wars, and they've funded both sides of the North and the South side of the war. But when do you feel that this happened?
Let me think for a moment. The bankers, that's probably as good a name as any for them. Some people call them the banksters, and I kind of have an affinity to that name because I used to think that bankers were very honorable and meticulous people, but then I discovered they're not all, of course, but the biggest bankers and the biggest banks in the world are criminal institutions. But anyway, all of this goes way, way back. I discovered almost to the beginning of money. And money wasn't always as we know it. Money, by definition, is simply a medium of exchange. It's something you use to swap for something you want. And it's not barter. Barter is a direct exchange. I give you this I give you this apple, you give me that orange, and that was a swap. That's barter. But if you have an apple and I don't have anything else that you particularly want, I may have a nugget of gold or something, and you would say, well, I don't have any use for the gold, but I know everybody else wants gold, or a lot of them. I'll certainly be able to swap it. So you give me your apple for a little piece of gold or silver, and even though you don't intend to use it, you can use it as a storehouse of value and a medium of exchange. And that's suddenly, now we're talking about money. So money, in that sense, you can trace the history way, way back to the beginning of civilization, but not until it became possible to use a third party in the exchange of these tokens of value. In other words, you could take your money, to your gold or silver, to a silversmith, and he would guard it for you because he had the vault. He had a lot of silver, and you had maybe a little bit of silver, and you worried about somebody stealing it from you, and you wanted to put it in safekeeping. You would take it to the goldsmith or the jeweler because they already had the vault, and say, "Will you guard this for me, and I'll pay you a fee?" And they would say, "Sure." Well, that was the beginning now of banking. So you put your money, your gold and silver, into their vault, and you pay them a little token fee for the valuable service. But then these bankers got the idea, well, they had your money and you generally didn't want all of it at the same time. And they kept getting larger and larger quantities of this gold and silver that belonged to other people. And they were collecting money on it. You might call that interest or a storage fee. And they thought, well, this is silly. We got all this gold here. Nobody ever wants it all at the same time. Why don't we lend it out? It's not ours, but nobody knows. So they started to lend out somebody else's gold and collect interest on it. And for the most part, the people that owned that gold didn't know that's what they were doing and didn't really think about it. All they cared about is, well, when they wanted theirs, they could go in and give their little paper receipt and say, I want it back. I want my deposit of gold back. As long as they got it back, that was fine. And as long as only, 10% or less of the population wanted it at the same time, the banks could get away with it. But finally, the day came when they got a little too greedy and they loaned out so much that the time came when people wanted their money back. The banks had to say, whoops, we don't really have it here today. Can you come back next week or next month? And the word got out, they don't have my money. And of course, that was the run on the bank. And that was the first one, and then the second one. And all of a sudden, people understood that, wait a minute, there was something fishy going on with banking. So anyway, when did the bankers really take over is a good question. They took over in a sense from the very beginning, but they became better at it with the passage of time. They became better at it, and especially as the population became less suspicious, when, all the old timers die off and the new kids come along, and they were just born into the existing system. And so they thought it was just fine. They never questioned it. And so the banks got this prestige that they didn't deserve. And people were very surprised when the banks failed. So still, I haven't answered your question. I'm going to say that the kind of control that we're seeing today, where it was so deep and so heavy that the banks, instead of being regulated by the government, began to get the power to regulate. The banks themselves were regulating the government. So the government was being regulated by the banks, and nobody knew it because on surface it wasn't that way. The bank got their charter from the government, and the government still had the right to call them and make them, give in reports and so forth. And the president appoints the head of the CIA and so forth. I mean, head CIA, and it was a Freudian slip, the head of the Federal Reserve System. And so it still had all the appearances that government was controlling the banks. But when did the banks start controlling the government? And I would say that happened with the formation of the Federal Reserve System, when this whole fraudulent system of fractional reserve banking was institutionalized by law. And we called that the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, as you correctly pointed out. From that point forward, the criminality of what they were doing was legalized by the law itself. And nobody really understood the intricacies of it to complain. And besides, it didn't start out that way. In the beginning, the Federal Reserve Act was not nearly as onerous as it is now. There were a lot of provisions which were removed in order to get it passed. William Jennings Bryan and his populist group, his following, were very concerned about the power of this thing called the Federal Reserve System, and they were preventing it from being passed into law. And so the organizers of the Fed, the promoters of it, said, "Well, look, let's remove some of these issues, these terms that they're concerned about. They think we can create too much money out of nothing, and that's what we want to do, of course. But look, let's get this thing passed into law, so we can tone it down now, make it not so bad, get it into law, and we can fix it up later." That was literally what they said in their own words. So they removed some of the onerous provisions, and the Fed really wasn't too bad in the beginning. It had the ability to become bad, which it did. So that's how it was passed into law. But the seed was planted when the Federal Reserve System was created. And then this banking fraud of creating money out of nothing and charging interest on nothing, which is what they do, that all became institutionalized. Prior to that, in 19 the state banks were playing that game, but it hadn't been nationalized. So they thought, let's pass a law called the Federal Reserve Act, which would make it legal to do this and to do it across the nation and put all banks into one cartel. And that's what they did. Nobody understood it except a few. And so that was in 1913. So that was my answer to your question. I say it was totalized in 1913. And it didn't get any better since then.
Yes, and they so Congress or legislation, yeah, Congress is the ones that's supposed to be able to make money, but now the banks make money and they also control the treasury. Did
Well,
that
that's
happen?
not quite right. If you read the Constitution, Congress was never given the power to make money. It was given the power to identify money and to define it. But it said, see, making, well, you could make money out of gold or silver or something of value, but they said in the Constitution, it says to coin money. And of course, today you could coin a phrase, they invented a phrase. But when they wrote that provision of the Constitution, everybody knew what it meant. That meant the only thing a state or the federal government could do is to coin money. And then they defined what that was. It was so many ounces of 0.999 gold and silver and so forth. It's been amended a couple of times over history, but it's always, the federal government has never had the power to create money, but to define it and to protect its value by ensuring that the money was indeed abiding by the characteristics in the Constitution. But never was it allowed to make money out of debt. And that's right in the Constitution even today. And, so if the Congress couldn't make money out of debt, then it can't grant that power to a group of private banks. But it did, and nobody complained. The Supreme Court still hasn't complained. Because, why is that? Why? Because the banks now are in charge, not the government.
And so when you say the banks are in charge, because they're not just in charge of the Federal Reserve and the printing of money, they're in charge of, I mean, the whole United States is corporations that are for profit for these banksters. I love that you said that. When did that go down? Because they do now Congress doesn't print the money that these banksters do. When did it go down where they actually started corporatizing the government? Because it's no, I mean, Mr. Griffin, it's like here in Hawaii, we have been testifying against the general plan and trying to stop other bills, and they're ignoring the people completely. We had over 900 people say no to a bill where they wanted to take out religious exemption for the, and I don't want to talk about it too much, but for the V, for children to go to school. 900 people testified no, 160 testified yes, and they still put it through. They're just ignoring the people because I believe that this whole country, the whole system is now corporatized. It's a corporation, it's not a government, so the people don't have a voice. So, like, when did that happen? Because they took over the Federal Reserve, the IRS, which is not even part of the government, it's part of these in the pockets of these elite banksters. When did they take? When did
Well,
they?
as I see it, it's similar to what I said a moment ago. It didn't happen on a certain date. It was a process, and it started, I think you could honestly say it started in 1913 with the Federal Reserve, because the banks are corporations, but they were created by the federal government. The charter for the banking system, the central bank, the Federal Reserve System, is created by Congress, similar to most corporations outside of that are created by state governments. But all these corporations are created by governments and they're legalized in that fashion. But when you think about it, the government itself is a corporation. We don't call it that, but it's an institution which is structured exactly like corporations, or almost exactly. And it brings me back to one of my favorite topics and we talk about the difference between individualism and collectivism as being the central issue of ideology in the world today. What kind of a political system do we want? Do we want to have it based on the principle that the group is more important than the individual, and that the individual must be sacrificed if necessary for the greater good of the greater number, which is what we have? Nobody thinks about it, but that's what we have. It's called collectivism. And all of these other systems like communism, fascism, Nazism, socialism, all of these things are variants of collectivism, regardless of what we call them. And that is not a totality. It's an ideology, and you can have various degrees of it. And ever since it was introduced to America, primarily in the beginning of World War One, when we were told by our leaders that, well, we're fighting against these bad people, World War One, all these totalitarians overseas, and then World War Two, repeat again. These countries were fascist and Nazi and totalitarian, and our leaders said, we cannot fight against a totalitarian system if we have to abide by the Constitution. It slows us down, and they'll beat us, and we'll all die. We'll be conquered. And they convinced most Americans, oh, yeah, that's true, isn't it? This is a war, man. You can't wait around and worry about freedom of speech. And so that's why these people who want totalitarian rule love wars. And they're always in a war of some kind to keep us frightened so that we don't have time for constitutional limitations. We got to win this war, man, don't you know? It was the fear porn concept from the very beginning. And that started primarily in World War One. By the end of World War Two, we were full in it. And there were a lot of people, I was surprised to find out in my research that there were a lot of people in Washington at the time who actually, this is World War II we're talking about, who actually were praising people like Mussolini and Adolf Hitler because they had a more efficient political system than we did. And efficiency was everything, you understand, because we got a war to win, right? Well, it hasn't changed much. Today we have wars against cancer, wars against terrorism, wars against everything you can imagine, wars against viruses and things. It's war, man. We don't have time for constitutional limitations on any of this. So that's why, in my view, we have wars, and other threats of wars all around us to keep us willing to buy into that. So what happens is gradually over time, bit by bit, all these constitutional limitations, which benefited us so highly over our history, were whittled away, and the public was sort of glad to see them go. Need I remind you? Look at your news today, and you see all of our glorious leaders who are praising freedom and the Constitution and our American heritage and condemning all these wild idiots on the left. Look at what they're doing. They're saying, in essence, read it carefully, we don't have time for constitutional limitations. We have a war against these nasty people. They're the bad people. We have to get rid of them. And the freedom lovers are saying, hooray, now we've got our man on a white horse, and he's going to save us. So in other words, the people themselves have been fooled into thinking that freedom, a constitutional republic that guarantees us our individual liberty, is a bad idea. And so therefore there are no breaks anymore. And that's when the the tempo sped up tremendously. Every time there's another war or a conflict, you have 9/11 or something, people are saying, we've got to get to the bottom of this, and we're willing to give away our freedoms. We're down to the point now, if you really look at it objectively, where every one of the liberties that are guaranteed to us in the 10 Amendments in the Constitution are gone, except one, and it's almost gone, and that's the right to bear arms. And they're really whittling away on that. Once they get that last one away from us, and we'll tell them, and we'll say it's a good idea. We don't, yeah, we got to give up our firearms so we can arrest all of these other bad people who've got guns. So let's get rid of guns, and then the bad people will go away. That's what they want us to think. Already we've given up, willingly given up, without too much complaint, all of our other freedoms. And nobody is even worried about it except idiots like myself. I'm very, very worried about it.
I'm worried. I'm worried. I've been, yes. Well, in 1984, you interviewed Yuri Bezmenov from Russia who defected. He was a KGB. And he talked about the 4 stages of ideological subversion, which is what we're totally, I mean, it's actually what we're in right now, because this, and they have propagandized us so much that people think that the Constitution is bad and is going, and that people who believe in freedom and the Constitution are the bad people like us. So
Mhm, mhm.
this, that interview, I watched it for a little bit, and it blew my mind, because this man he was in Russia, he was in the KGB, he defected, and he saw that when he came to the United States, he saw what was going on here was what Russia was about, was what that socialism was about. Would you explain that a little bit? Do you remember that
Well, that's
interview?
exactly, you summarized it. Yeah, a KGB agent. He was uh, born into a family with high rank in the Soviet Union. His father was a general, fought in the original Bolshevik Revolution. So he was from the privileged class. Now, they'd like to tell you that communism is a classless society. Nothing could be further from the truth. The members of the Communist Party and the hierarchy in that organization are a very high class under any collectivist system, whether you call it communism or fascism or Nazism or Americanism. You can put any name on it you wish. But where you have collectivism, which is the actual ideology behind all of those, there's a very high class and high class system. And the people at the top, of course, don't technically own anything in terms of a piece of paper that gives them ownership rights, but they have political right to dominate property, that things that you and I cannot do. I mean, they have limousines, they live in mansions, they have expense accounts, anything they want, they get. They may not own it, but they control it. And if you think about it, controlling a piece of property is the definition of ownership. It just doesn't have a piece of paper that says you own it, but you still do, whether you have that paper or not. So we're back to even another topic all of a sudden, and that is what you might call the dumbing down of the population. It's been one of the projects of these people for a long time, hundreds of years. They're very shocked by the high degree of awareness and education that some of the Western countries were achieving, especially the United States, and they didn't want informed people. And that's why they had to take over the educational system, which they did. And they started teaching our kids, this was a hundred and some years ago, teaching them the principles of collectivism. They called it Marxism, or New Dealism, or something like that, or progressivism. They have all kinds of names for it. But it's still collectivism underneath. And so now, as Yuri Bezmenov, the defector, said, he said, once the collectivists who call themselves communists, it's an important way to say it, collectivists who call themselves communists, but they're really collectivists first, because they could call themselves fascist and they would be the same people, but we would think they were opposite to communists. Anyway, this is something Americans don't think about, is that collectivism is the enemy And we have collectivists in deep state who are anti-communists. And we have collectivists who are communists who are anti-American. And we think we have to choose between one of those two sides, and they're the same side. That's why that's why they are constantly winning. And you know, if you're going to be hung as a criminal by a regime, you don't care what it calls itself. You're still hanging there because you were opposed to the regime itself. And that's the kind of world we're living in. I don't know. I wandered away from your topic, but basically, I think you asked, when did this happen? Well, it's still happening, but it seems to me that we're at the tail end of that process now, where practically nobody is concerned about having restraints on the state. We've been conditioned, educated, and conditioned and brainwashed into thinking that the powerful state is the answer to all of our problems. And we're not allowed to think about the fact that a state that can give us everything we want is also capable of taking from us everything we have.
Absolutely. So that brings us up to the present time, because this has been going on for a very, very long time. And it's like I said a long time ago, I said this is like a frog when the sea things started happening. I said this is a frog and starting in a pot of warm water, and they're going to start turning up the heat. And now it's boiling and the frog is still in the water. Uh, you know, a lot of times, and a lot of people believe that Trump is the savior, and I wish that we did have a savior. But I'm looking at this, and I do like a lot of the things he's doing with exposing all of the fraud and the money and that. But when he says, I want to take Canada and have it the 51st state, and I want to take Greenland, and then I'm looking at the Club of Rome's map of the 10 kingdoms that are under the one world order, and I'm looking at this going, is he, I mean, what do you think about that, with him saying let's take Canada? You can't just take a country. I mean, that's a dictator. You can't just say I'm going to take this country over and have it be what do you think about that?
Well, it's absurd. And it's amazing to me that there are a lot of Americans who think that's a jolly good idea. You know, um, to me, I don't pay any attention to who's doing the speaking. If they're a politician, I'm very suspicious because I know how politics works. Um, Political parties, I think, are a, a very, very bad thing because they get corrupted. We don't know who runs the Republican Party or who runs the Democrat Party, but we do know one thing: it's not the voters. Okay? Those are corporations. We're back to that again. They're an institution. And any institution, whether it's government or political parties or corporations or manufacturing companies, educational systems, even churches, religions, any institution where you have a concentration of a lot of money and a lot of power over policies of the nation, power over people, and usually that translates into money. Wherever you have that, it becomes a magnet for the predator class. Every crook that was ever walking the earth wants to work in government because if they can get into government, it's a lot easier to stay out of jail because you're the guy that puts other people into jail and you can condemn them and you have the power and the authority and the respect and the money and the authority and the law on your side. And the biggest crooks always want to get into government. Yeah, it reminds me of a letter that was sent to Thomas Jefferson shortly after the Constitution was drafted and accepted there in Philadelphia. And we know about this letter because it's in the Jefferson archives. This was a doctor that was a friend of Jefferson. He sent him a letter, and he said, Mr. Jefferson, now that we have the new Constitution and the new Republic, I think he called it correctly as a republic, he said, how can we be sure that there are only good men in office? Okay. And Jefferson's reply was magnificent. It was a little bit sharp, and you could tell he was holding back his temper. He said something like this. He said, Let us not speak of good men in office. Rather, let us bind men down with the chains of the Constitution. And in other words, in modern vernacular, he was saying, good men in office? You got to be kidding. Good men, you may find one or two, but mostly you will find scoundrels in office in government. It's historically demonstrated. It's logical if you understand human nature. You can see it with your own eyes. Um, Government is a magnet to the predator class, and any system that's built on trust is going to fail. And that was Jefferson's message. He was saying we should build our system on mistrust. We should watch these people like a hawk, and we should be sure that we have institutions like our Constitution and laws that require us to monitor, constantly monitor and verify that these people are doing exactly what they're authorized to do by the Constitution and nothing more. And yet today, where are we on that idea? We drive down this road and we see all these signs. Vote for Thomas Brown, a man you can trust. Okay? And everybody says, well, you got to trust your government. And I say, no, you don't. You have to distrust your government. Otherwise, you will lose your liberty. And I think that's the essence, that's the lesson of liberty, the essence of freedom that the American people have forgotten. They once knew it, but they have forgotten it. And our mission, if we wish to turn this around, is to reinstill the wisdom of that concept into the American people.
Absolutely. Do you think I think that the Republican and the Democratic Party are actually two wings of the same bird, and they say that democracy is dead, but this country wasn't founded on democracy, it was founded on a republic. And the difference is, you guys, is that democracy is a mob rule, and a republic means every single person has freedoms and liberty. So what do you feel about the Republican and the Democratic Party? I think they're two wings of the same bird. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's always, not always, but that's been my position for a long, long time. That it's the idea, what's the difference between the right wing and the left wing? You know, what's the difference between Republicans and Democrats? Just the name, primarily. If you look at their belief systems, what they vote for, what they advocate, the redistribution of wealth, uh, there's no serious opposition to any of it. They may have they put on an appearance. See, this is part of the scheme. They have to put on an appearance that they are opposites. Otherwise, voters won't fall for the scheme. Voters require that must have a choice. Which side are you on? They want to create the sides that you have to choose between. They don't want to give you your free choice, but they'll create two choices and say, these are your choices. Which one do you want? Well, if you're on the right, you're a Nazi, you're a fascist. If you're on the left, you're a communist, all right? Okay, which one are you on? Let's get on with this thing. You're Republican or Democrat? Well, you say, well, they're not the same, are they? And I said, well, aren't they? Well, tell me how they're different. Well, look, the speeches they give. And I said, yeah, but look at what they vote for. Oh, well, they even vote differently. Look, they have conflicts. I say, yeah, for short periods of time, but somehow that all feathers out. If you look back over the voting record of Congress over the past couple of 100 years or 150 years, there's been a constant continuum in the growth of government, the increase of taxes, and the decrease of personal liberty, regardless of which political party is in office. They fight with each other, they call each other dirty names. Reminds me of my grandmother back in the day when television first came into being. We had a TV set in my grandmother's house, and she watched the wrestling matches. They had crummy wrestling matches. I think it was every Saturday or whatever. Anyway, she loved to watch wrestling matches, and she'd get all excited, you know. And what happened, of course, I watched a few of them myself. There's always two wrestlers to come out, and one's got an American flag on his, wearing on a cape, and he's a clean-cut guy, blue-eyed, blonde hair, and he's Mr. America, you know. And then somebody comes on, he's all dirty and snarly, got a swastika on his arm, and he's really an ugly guy. And you know who you have to root for, of course. Well, they throw each other around in the wrestling match. They pound each other. Once in a while, one gets thrown out of the ring, wham, down on the floor. They hurt each other. It's a real fight. But they know who's going to win, And I can imagine this when they go back to the locker room afterwards. They say, "Hey, Jim, that was a good fight, boy. You really that hurt, you know." And oh, let's go have a drink, you know. And both of these guys work for the same owner. The same owner and trainer, the same company owns both of those wrestlers. But they have to put on a show. Otherwise, the people are not going to come and pay a ticket to go watch the match. Now, this is the model of politics. They have to put on a show. Each side has to represent, at least temporarily, a strong motion in the opposite direction. Otherwise, it won't look realistic. But you notice that in the long run, when all the tallies are put in, it's always the same side that wins. And it's not necessarily the American flag versus the swastika. It could be just some smelly looking guy and some handsome guy and so forth. And he's innocent and the other guy is trickery. He's a fake guy. He's sneaking behind him and so forth. It doesn't always fall on national lines, but you always have to have a winner. And they have to hurt each other. Now, I'll give you one more example, and then I'll stop talking and let you ask a question. There was a time in my history where I was learning all of this, that this was back in the 1960s and 70s. I was working for a large corporation in Los Angeles, and I got really curious about this thing called communism. So I went down to the communist bookstore in Los Angeles. It was called the People's Bookshop. And I started hanging out with the comrades down there. Of course, it was a weird combination because here I am, a corporate guy, got my suit on and my tie, shiny suit, sideburns, you know, I have to look the corporate world. And these guys are pretty hippie oriented and kind of didn't look like we would get along well together. But they thought I was really interested in learning about communism, which I was, by the way, but not for the reasons of joining with them. I wanted to find out what is going on with these guys. So to make a long story short, I bought a lot of books. I think I bought all the important books they had in the store. I mean, I had to read Das Kapital and Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. And I read, I read Mao Zedong and all of that. But then I came across the collected works of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. And that was sort of down on the bottom of the shelf. There's bound volumes. And he was a very prolific writer, I found out. And so I bought the set, and I, unlike the comrades down in the store, I actually read them. I found out they'd never read these things. Most of them hadn't read it. And what I found is essay after essay after essay, on many different topics, but the theme was always pretty much the same. Now here is the theme condensed as I would condense it to a central theme. It was something like this. He said, comrades, when we go into a country and we want to take it over from the inside, we're not going to invade it with armies and guns. We're going to take it over using its own citizens so they don't know who to fight. It's not a war in their mind. And when we do that, do we stand up and say, and tell them, we are communists and we want to change your system. We want to destroy your heritage, your legal system, even your school system, your values, your religions, and form you into an international movement of social equality and so forth, whatever words they choose to use. Do we do that? He said, no, of course not, because they would reject us. We tell them we are anti-communists. We tell them that we love the heritage of the nation and their traditions. And we just tell them what they want to hear. And then they will like us and they will follow us and we can become their leaders. And then once we are their leaders, now we can reveal ourselves. And if they object, we can shoot them. This is Lenin. Lenin has a great quote that sums it up. He says, this is a direct quote, by the way. Lenin said, promises are like pie crusts, made to be broken. Now, we're on to something. You don't get any of this by reading Karl Marx, the Marxists. And one of the most important lessons I learned was the difference between what they call a Marxist and what they call a Marxist-Leninist, or sometimes just a Leninist. Now, until I started reading their materials, I had no idea what those words meant. But then I discovered this, that all the nations that fell to communism none of them were ever taken over by Marxists. They were taken over by Marxist Leninists because they followed the Leninist strategy of deception. Lenin was the founder of the Communist Party. He wasn't interested in winning a debate. He said, we don't want to win a debate. We want to come to power. The goal is not to be popular, not to tell the truth, not to win a debate, but to come to power. That is all we are interested in. And we can accomplish everything else after we come to power. Now I began to understand the battle that we're in. Now I understand the Marxists never take over anything. They can be very effective in the schools teaching the ideology, but the ones that come to power in politics and at the heads of the universities and the heads of the corporations and all the power pinnacles, these are Leninists who are willing to lie, cheat, steal, and commit any crime to come to power. Now, once you understand that, and you take a look at politics as we know it, it's a perfect match in every department. And anybody who reads Lenin that doesn't understand it, there's something wrong with their head. So this is why I'm going to close this by saying, if you really want to know what's going on today, go down to the Communist bookstore and get the collected works of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin and read the bloody things, and you will see everything unfold before your eyes.
Wow, I completely 100% agree, because looking at this country, it's nothing like when I was growing up, and with the 9/11 and the Patriot Act and and pretty much taking away, literally criminalizing American people as if we're terrorists. I do have a couple more questions though, because Trump is supposedly declassifying JFK, the JFK assassination, which is really interesting, around what happened with JFK. Do you believe that he was trying to out the bankers and the central, what was happening with the Federal Reserve?
I don't know what to believe. I'll tell you one thing, I don't trust any politician. I want to believe, but I've read Lenin.
Yeah. The other thing I want to ask is about Israel. 80% of Congress has a dual citizenship with Israel. And they actually had a reporter, I think it was Stu Peters, had somebody going in asking each congressman, who would you support, Israel or America? And every single one that would actually even give him a comment said Israel. What's the deal? What is the deal with Israel? Because there's something going on over there in the Middle East. And then Trump is like, we're going to make Gaza part of America. I'm like, what's happening over there?
Well, it's the same picture, but some different players. Now we have to go back to this issue of who is the enemy. Is it communists? Um, is it Israel? Is it Russia? Is it who knows? Is it national? Is it racial? What is the enemy? And as far as I'm concerned, the enemy is collectivism. All of the tyrannical systems that scare the wits out of us have that in common. They're all collectivists in nature. So why don't we just deal with that? That's what they are, regardless of who they appear to be. They're collectivists. So let's make that our enemy. I don't care who it is. I don't care what color of the skin, what nationality, or what part of the world you live in, or any. If you're a collectivist, you're probably out to take away my liberties because you think it's good for me, you know? So once we understand that, then we go back and take a look at the Israeli situation. It's collectivism, and so collectivism doesn't care what you call it. And the people, the collectivists in Israel, not in Israel, rather the collectivists who run Israel, the Zionists, let's use the correct name, are not really Jews. That came as a real big surprise to me. What? The Zionists are not Jews? No, that's not the essence of their ideology, what they're all about. They're trying to, I think they're carrying the cloak of being Jews so that you can't criticize them without risking being called an anti-Semite. It's sort of a ploy. But you look at the people at the top of the movement, they look like they're Jews, but I've seen some videos of a couple of rabbis recently talking about what is a Jew. I thought, well, I don't know what is a Jew, and they both were clear, and they were separate people. They didn't even know each other. They said that the definition of a Jew is a person who believes in the Jewish religion. Just like what is a Catholic? Well, it's not a nationality, it's not a race. Anybody can be a Catholic if they believe in Catholicism. And this was basically their message. And they said, both of them, that these Zionists who are running the show pretend that themselves are not religious. He said, in fact, they are atheists. I thought, I got it. I get it. They're pretending to be one thing. They're pretending to be a nation of Israel that is promised the promised land by God or something. And a lot of people pick up on, oh, yeah, that sounds good. Therefore, it's got to be good. But he said, that's not what they're all about. Look at the people themselves who are playing that show, and they're one worlders, and they're collectivists, and they want to build a one world order, the same as the communists, the same as the Nazis, the same as the deep staters. That's why they all work together against freedom. They don't care. They may combat each other for dominance, like Adolf Hitler and Joe Stalin fought each other in World War II. They both believed the same thing, but they weren't fighting over ideology. They were fighting over territory and dominance. And we see that in the world today. Collectivists of all different forms and shapes, they're still collectivists, and they're fighting for territory or dominance. And they're unified on one thing, and that's you and I, the free people that want to be free. That's their common enemy. They must stamp out all instinct for personal freedom and opportunity for personal freedom, and then they'll fight it out among themselves to see who's going to be at the top of the pyramid. That's how I see it, and everything fits that scenario as far as I'm concerned.
100% agree with you, absolutely, because the Zionists are the banking elite families that are the ones that said the Jews need to have this country, Israel, and they put it in Palestine, and there were people there. They act like there was no people there, but there were, and it was horrendous what they did there. But it does all go back, and also Rothschild, the first banker in the 1500s to the king, that's not even his real last name. His real last name is Mauer, Mauer. He was German. He wasn't a Jew. So
Yeah.
I love it because they are fake
If you
Jews.
accept the definition that a Jew is a person who believes in and practices the Jewish faith, he's not a Jew. That's that's in the discussion right there. Now, if you have some other definition, I would be happy to listen to it, but that's the only one that makes sense to me.
Absolutely. One.
We know it's almost like a joke. Well, some of my best friends are Jews. Well, they really are. And I never even think about ethnicity or race when I have friends. They're in all colors and mixtures. And I like that idea. It feels very comfortable to me. But when you try and uh, make me sound like I'm prejudiced against somebody because of the color of their skin or their religious beliefs, I get mad at that because that's not who I am. But I recognize why they do it because they don't want to deal with the real issues, which is the battle between individualism and collectivism. They want to get us divided among each other on race or ethnicity or religion or something else so they can divide and conquer us. It's as simple as that.
And that's so true because if you're saying something about the Jews and you're saying a certain thing that they're doing and they call you an anti-Semite, then it's just focusing on that. It's not focusing on your argument, which
Exactly, exactly. They'll never, and they're very smart and they're very good at that. And Lenin taught that.
say that again. You cut out just for a second.
Well,
I
I
don't
said,
know.
and that is one of the things that Lenin advocated is this divide and conquer thing. Stay away from the issues. Is that our object is not to win a debate. Our object is to come to power.
Yeah,
Keep
yeah.
that in mind, and you'll understand so much more. It won't make sense unless you understand that this is deliberate deception at work.
Absolutely. So, Mr. Griffin, what do you think is coming for the American people now that Trump's in office and with all the it's it's astronomical what's happening. And some of it I agree I like because I love the exposure of the fraud and how much money has really been spent on frivolous things and whatnot. But what do you think is coming for them? What do you think is coming down the pipe for the American people?
Well, I think I've been pretty well stating it. Until the American people wake up to the deception that is at work, they're going to continue to approve of what is happening. They're going to think it's wonderful. And they'll come to the point someday where all of a sudden there'll be something that will happen. And the heroes of our day will say, well, we need martial law in order to put down this terrible, terrible situation. Maybe they'll say we're being invaded by aliens or something. Well, now we need martial law. Now we don't have any room left for freedom of speech. We have to unite against interstellar or intergalactic enemies or something. I don't put anything past these people, but it'll probably be, broken water systems and riots and more fires and maybe an atomic bomb will go off in Cincinnati. Who knows? They're capable of anything. As long as it helps them come to power, they will do it. And unless you're aware of that strategy, you're going to fall for it. So all they have to do is just keep making things bad, 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 badder, and baddest until finally people say, I give up. You know, Tell me what to do. And they'll say, well, first you get out of your house, get in the truck, and we'll take you someplace and put you to work. Oh, thank you, they'll say. Thank you. Oh, save us. We need food. We need water. We need shelter. We need health care. We need clothing. We're cold. Help us. That's where it's going if we don't stop it. But first we have to see the plan before we'll know who the enemy is.
So how do we stop it? What are your I'm in speaking out, I'm writing these books. I've been invited on your Red Pill Expo, which you guys redpillexpouniversity.org. Is that what it is? I'll put it in the description. You've got to check it
Right.
out. He has so many amazing speakers and is really, really sharing the truth in so many different ways. So mahalo for having me last year twice. What can people do? Is it just speaking out? Is it just sharing the truth, or is it more?
Well, it's more. I think we still have time, or a little of it, but we still have time, and we still have opportunity to pull this chestnut out of the fire. The first step is to become aware of the strategy being used against us. As long as we're blind to that and we're enthusiastically falling for it, then there is no hope. And it looks like it might go that way, but it doesn't have to. How do we reverse that? First step is to get the truth out about the strategies being used. The next step is to have a better understanding of this difference between collectivism and individualism. That's a study in itself. It's not that complicated, but it's new to most people. And so I think anybody that would, I have a booklet on it. In fact, we published, it's a free booklet. Let me get it out here. And anybody that wants a copy of it, get it free. It's called The Chasm. And there it is. And what this is all the information that I have been planning to put in my next book when it's published soon, I hope. All the information that relates to collectivism versus individualism, I said, let's not wait for the book to be finished. Pulled it out and put it in this 50-page document. And I urge you to read it. I think there are very few people that will say, I disagree with this. I think even those who are falling for some of the mantras of collectivism, I found this amazingly encouraging that some people who I would consider to be diehard collectivists read this and they say, I've been thinking maybe I've been an individualist all this time and didn't know it. And it's a great feeling to hear somebody say that, and it's happening all the time. So anyway, if you want to learn more about that, it's called The Chasm, and you go on the internet and just type in chasm, CHASM realityzone.com. So that's chasm.realityzone.com. And you can download this booklet and print it out if you wish, or just read it online. So that's the next step. And then the third step is to recapture control of the power centers of society. And this is not done with guns and bullets. We lost it without being guns and bullets in the fray. We lost it because people who were collectivists followed Lenin, and they decided to come to power. And so they started running for political office. They started going into the media as reporters. They started becoming teachers in schools. and so they could teach these things. We lost because they took the initiative. It's not that they're smarter than we are, not because their argument is better than ours. It's just that we didn't try. We just thought everything was fine, and did nothing while they were waging a war against us. We can recapture the power centers of society. And by that, I'm talking about the political parties. Now, if we can't recapture them, we can build caucuses within them and gradually convert them into genuine political parties, which have built-in reservations that would prevent the principles from being altered in any way. That's never been done. We have to be careful that we ourselves don't become corrupted once we have the power that Lenin is talking about. We have to make sure that we ourselves and our followers, our heritage, don't become corrupted by that tremendous temptation of money and power in an institution. It can be done, and we have to just replace these members in Congress and in the Senate and in the Supreme Court and in the media and so forth. It's a generational process. Now, having said that, that means it's not going to happen by the next election. When most people say, how do we turn this around? They're thinking, how can we do this by the next election? That's not going to happen. It's taken them, what, 150 years, something like that, to go from their ground zero to where they are now. And we're not going to turn this around in 4 years, but we can turn it around. Now, the downside of that is that it's not going to be easy, and there's going to be one hell of a price to pay. We're not going to get out of this without paying the price for not being diligent all this time. If we had responded in the 1960s along the lines I'm talking about now, I think we could have done it without too much hardship. But now the economy is in ruins. People are confused. A lot of young people have been programmed in the opposite direction. They think they're collectivists. There will be the other side is not going to sit by and wait while this just happens. They're going to be pulling all kinds of shenanigans. There'll be hardship. There'll be things to scare us to death. There'll be wars, maybe. There'll be famine. There'll be water supplies will go off and people will be killing each other for water. Who knows? These people know. They know how to do that. They could poison a water system in Los Angeles very easily. One or two people could do that just by going to where the water reserves are and dumping some toxic things in it, and people wouldn't be able to drink the water. Think about things like that, and you're thinking like the enemy thinks. There's going to be hell to pay, in other words. So if you're thinking, how do we do this without having to sacrifice anything, or without having to make some effort and risking our own well-being, it's not going to happen that way. It's time for us to respond like our founding fathers responded. And they pledged their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor to create this country. I think we have to do the same to restore it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Griffin. I could not agree with you more. People ask me how did I get started and why do I do this? And my start was just anger, just absolute anger because of the murder of what they're and the attacks of what they're doing. But it is going to take each one of us. So you guys, his description, the link to that book is going to be in the description if you missed it. And I just wanted to say again, so much mahalo for your time, Mr. Griffin. Any last words? We are on the Voice of Kona Radio, so I want to do a shout out to the Voice of Kona Radio if you're listening.
These are exciting times in which to live, and with all of the bad things we've been talking about, think of the bright. We're still here, and we're learning, and God has given us an opportunity by allowing us to live in this time. We are given the opportunity to literally make a difference in the world far, far into the future, as long as we respond to the call.
So I always do a prayer at the end. So let's go ahead and just pray, and then I'll send you off on your way. Infinite Creator, Great Spirit of all things, you are beating our hearts and you're breathing our bodies. And we are just so grateful for the intuition that we have to do our kuleana, what is ours to do. And we send so much appreciation and gratitude to Mr. Griffin and his team and his tenacity to keep going. This man who wrote this book so many years ago, Creature from Jekyll Island, that revealed the truth about what happened, and his tenaciousness of just keep going and learning to really dive deep at a time when nobody else was doing this work. So just sending him, his higher self, so much appreciation and gratitude. In Great Spirit, we do know that this world can be a better place. We do see the harmony that can come forth in this world where people live free, where all people matter, where our children are safe. We call that forth now, Great Spirit. We call forth the binding of anyone who does not value freedom, who does not value the rights and property of individuals, who does not value human life. We bind them right now, Great Spirit, with the infinite creator, with the frequency of Christ and his unconditional love, with that frequency of love that's so, so bright and so strong. We bind them from doing any more harm. And we call forth all people who value freedom to step up, to do what is in their heart to do, what calls them forward to bring about freedom and peace back into the world, because we know that it can happen. And we give so much gratitude to our guides and the legions of angels. We are truly never alone, Great Spirit. We are so grateful for that. And so it is. We call that forth. Thank you so much, Mr. Griffin, for joining me today. And I just look forward to seeing Red Pill this next year. And you guys check out the Red Pill University. That's also in the description. And get your book, The Chasm. What is it called again, Mr. Griffin?
It's called
That
the
book.
chasm. That's what it is. The great divide between individualism and collectivism. And it'll be an eye opener and a heart opener as well.
Great. So that link is in the description. And please, if you've enjoyed this, like and subscribe and share it with your friends. Much aloha.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye.